Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the 15th class of this series, which is an introduction into the sciences of Hadith. And in today's class, we will be discussing weak narrations or weak Hadith and the different types of weak Hadith that there are. Now, in today's, or on the syllabus at least, it says that we will be covering two topics. So on the syllabus, it tells us that we will be covering types of weak hadith, and we will also be covering acting upon a weak hadith. However, as I was preparing for this class, I realized it might be a lot in terms of the new words or the new terms that we'll be taking, and in terms of the time frame itself. So we'll see. If we finish both of these topics today, khair. If not, then maybe the second portion of it we will save for our next class, and we'll fit it in with the next class, or we will save that for the review session because it's not too long by itself anyways. That's why we bundled it together in this. Okay, so to begin as usual with our recap. In our last session on Sunday, we spoke about classification of hadith in respect or with respect to the strength and the weakness of the hadith. What is commonly known as a sahih hadith and da'if. These are the two famous words that we know in regards to hadith. However, we broke it down even further, and we broke it down in even more detail. So we first classified it into two broad categories. We have maqbool, hadith that are accepted, and we have marudud, hadith that are not accepted, that they're rejected. In the maqbool category, you have four different types of hadith. Essentially, you have two types of hadith, and then the second ones are kind of add-ons, you can say. So the four different types we have is sahih, right, by itself, also known as sahih li dhatihi. It just means sahih by itself. So you have sahih by itself. Then you have sahih li ghayrihi, which means it's sahih for other reasons. Sahih by itself, as we discussed, needs to meet 5 conditions. If it meets those 5 conditions, it is considered a sahih hadith. For example, some of the conditions are that the chain must be connected all the way, from the person narrating it to the Prophet ﷺ without anything missing. That is one of the conditions. One of the other conditions is that every single narrator in that chain has to have complete adala, which means their character, right? Their character fitness has to be complete in every single person in that chain. And then another condition is that the dabt of each and every narrator for that hadith has to be correct. Their accuracy when it comes to preserving the hadith. The hadith has to be free from anything that's abnormal, that might not seem correct, that might seem something that seems like it's contradicting. And then the last condition was that it has to be free from defects, right? And we talked a little bit in detail about these conditions, but for our recap purposes, if it meets these 5 conditions, the hadith is regarded as sahih. If the hadith meets 4 of these conditions, and the one condition of accuracy in terms of every single narrator, if maybe 1 or 2 narrators or even more have an issue with their accuracy, not with their character. So if they're known for lying or anything like that, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the category of dabt. If there's an issue with the dabt, that hadith moves from sahih to hasan. So the 2 categories we have here so far, sahih has to meet all 5 conditions. Hasan has to meet 4 conditions completely, and one of the conditions, which is dabt, is slightly loosened. Then it becomes hasan. Now, if there are other hadith that are supporting this hasan narration, it can raise it to the level of sahih, but it's known as sahih li ghayrihi, sahih for other reasons. And that's why we have sahih by itself and then sahih for other reasons. So a sahih hadith by itself meets all 5 conditions by itself. A sahih hadith li ghayrihi, sahih for other reasons, is essentially a hasan hadith that has other supporting evidence that raises it to that level. Then after that, you have the hasan hadith by itself, which meets 4 conditions completely, and one of the conditions is slightly loosened, specifically the condition of dabt. And it doesn't have any outside support raising it to the level of sahih li ghayrihi. This is a hadith hasan. The last type of hadith in this category is Hasan li ghayrihi. So it's not Hasan by itself, but it's Hasan for other reasons. And this essentially is a da'if hadith, is a weaker hadith. Has something, there's some issue with it, but because there's so many supporting narrations, it at least raises it to the level of Hasan. So those are the 4 hadith that are under maqbool, that are under accepted. Then we turn to the other category, which is mardud. And this deals with da'if hadith, those hadith that are classified as weak. And we said that in our class, which is today, we will be discussing this category in more detail, which is mardud, the rejected hadith, also known as da'if hadith, the weak hadith that we have. So that pretty much recaps for us everything we spoke about in our last session. All right, so on to today's session. As we said that if we don't finish all of the 2 topics, we'll save the second part of it, or the second topic specifically, for either next class or the review session. We'll start the review session with it maybe. But let's see how it goes, because there's a lot of new words that we'll be memorizing. But inshallah, I've planned it out in a way that it's very simple. There'll be new words that you do have to memorize, but it's going to break down very simply. It's going to break down in a way that it might seem overwhelming when we're throwing all of these new words out, but in reality, it's very simple. Like it's easy as memorizing Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, kind of like that. That morning prayer, afternoon prayer, midday prayer, the prayer at sunset, and then the evening prayer, the night prayer. So inshallah, it will be as easy as that for us. We just have to put in that little bit of effort. So when we're discussing weak hadith, da'if hadith, a hadith, as we spoke about in Sahih, that all Sahih hadith are not equal. Not every single hadith that's labeled Sahih is equal in its value. In a similar way, not every hadith that is considered da'if or weak, the word da'if means weak. Not every hadith that is considered da'if is equal in value. Some da'if hadith have more value than other da'if hadith. Some da'if hadith have more value based off of what makes it weak, right? Different things can make it weak. A narrator can make it weak, something in the chain can make it weak, right? Different issues that a hadith can have with it. And then going even more specific than that, let's say there's an issue with the chain. What exactly is wrong with the chain? That can make a difference as well. Are there multiple people missing from the chain? Is it the fact that we can't confirm 2 people met in the chain? Is it the fact that somebody from the top of the chain is missing, somebody from the bottom of the chain is missing? So specifically depending on the issue with the chain, the hadith can have a different value. In a similar way, a hadith can be categorized as da'if, as weak, by one scholar of hadith versus another scholar of hadith who might not see it as da'if because of their classification, because of the way that they're grading it. And it's similar to somebody who's testing you or an examiner. Some people are genuinely harder when it comes to grading others or testing, or they have a higher standard, you can say, in a sense, while other people, they're a little easier when it comes to grading things. And this human trait, because it's not specific to hadith, this human trait can be found in anything, including hadith. So depending on the one that is grading the hadith, a scholar of hadith sometimes can be a little more lenient than other scholars. And this later on has an effect. So if somebody like Imam al-Bukhari says the hadith is weak, right? If he actually says it's weak, then that's going to hold a lot more value than me saying it's weak, or somebody else saying it's weak that's alive currently or whatnot, because of the position of Imam al-Bukhari, because of the value that's given to his stringent conditions that are there. So depending on who is saying it's weak, right? If I say a hadith is strong and Imam al-Bukhari is saying it's weak, right? People are likely going to take the opinion of Imam al-Bukhari and say it's weak, even though I'm saying it's strong, right? I might not be as strict when it comes to the conditions to classify it as weak or whatnot. And I'm just giving you me as an example. I'm nowhere near capable of claiming a hadith is da'if or sahih or whatnot. That's an intense science that a person has to study years and years before they can even grade a hadith or make such claims. So coming back to this, that not all da'if hadith are equal. Not all da'if hadith are equal. Some are, in a sense, more, weak. Some are weaker than other hadith. So they're not all equal. It's not the same playing field. That's the first thing that we need to understand. The second thing is that, generally speaking, a hadith can be da'if for one of two reasons. The first reason is that there's an issue with the sanad, the chain. Right? There's an issue with the chain. The second reason is that there's an issue with the narrator himself. There's some issue with the narrator himself. And these are the broad issues. So for example, there can be issues with the matan as well, as you'll see. But it will be categorized under one of these two issues, and it's not a strict category in the sense that everything under here is because of chain, everything under here is because of the narrator. Right? This is just for our understanding that it can be into two broad categories. Usually you'll find something related to the chain or something related to the narrator, going back to that as the reason for this hadith being weak. Now, when it comes to the chain, that's the first one we're going to do. We are going to take five different types of hadith that become weak because of an issue in the chain. So we're going to do 5 categories or 5 types, and they're going to be 5 new words that we have to learn for this first category. An issue with the chain, and we're going to talk about what the issue is with the chain. This issue can be in the beginning of the chain, it can be in the middle of the chain, it can be at the end of the chain, but it's something to do with the sanad. There's something wrong with the sanad, and because there's something wrong with the sanad, it's da'if. Remember, let's relate it back to our understanding of sahih. We said a sahih hadith has to meet those 5 conditions. The first condition of the 5 conditions is that the chain has to be continuous to the Prophet ﷺ, right? So if the chain, by default, from that understanding, we can say, if the chain is not continuous, then that hadith is not sahih, right? Is it hasan? What are the conditions of hasan? We said all 4 have to be complete, meaning the chain has to be continuous. You can't have something missing in the hadith being hasan from the chain. So it's not sahih, it's not hasan. What's the definition of a da'if hadith? We did this last time. A da'if hadith is a hadith that does not meet the conditions for sahih or hasan. If any of the conditions that are required for sahih and hasan are missing, it's classified as da'if. And that's why we said because of what is missing, because of which condition, they can be different in their value, right? So now we have this understanding so far that because the chain is not continuous, we know automatically by default it will be categorized as da'if, as a weak hadith. Now we will further analyze what exactly is wrong with the chain, and once we figure out what's wrong with the chain, we can give it one of 5 names. That's all it is. As simple as that, right? I don't want us getting confused. So we're dealing with the chain. There's something wrong with the chain. Identifying what's wrong with the chain will allow us to give it one of these 5 names, and all of these 5 names deal with issues with the chain. So let's begin with these 5 names. All right, category 1 is known as al-mu'allaq, the hanging chain. Al-mu'allaq, mu'allaq, with the qaf at the end. And al-mu'allaq, which means to hang, something that's hanging, that's the linguistic definition of it, is a chain that starts at the Prophet ﷺ, it comes down and it's hanging, right? It's kind of like something that's dangling. There's nothing at the end. So let's say Imam al-Bukhari, who's here, he says that the Prophet ﷺ said, or he says that Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, right? The chain is not connected at the bottom of the chain. Where's the, it depends what you call the bottom of things, but let's say the beginning of the chain, which is I'm the narrator. Say I'm narrating from a person who's narrating from a person who's narrating from a person. I'm the beginning of the chain. The chain is starting with me, ending at the Prophet ﷺ. So every chain is supposed to end at the Prophet ﷺ, unless, remember we did the 4 types of hadith. Hadith Qudsi ends at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hadith marfu' ends at the Prophet ﷺ. Hadith mawquf ends at the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So depending on where the hadith is stopping, right, that's the end of the chain. So this hadith, mu'allaq, the hanging hadith, there's things missing at the bottom of the chain, right? Or in the beginning, however you want to call it, right? So it's missing at the narrator's part. Usually, right, by default, if a hadith is let's put it this way. By default, when we narrate hadith, it's very similar to the way that it's a hanging hadith, a mu'allaq. Why? Because when I tell you a hadith, I usually don't quote the entire chain. I don't say, I heard from my teacher who heard from his teacher who heard from his teacher who heard from his teacher who heard from Imam al-Bukhari who narrated from this person, from this person, from this person, from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, from the Prophet sallallahu. That would be a complete chain. Usually the form that I'm narrating it in, it's not a mu'allaq hadith, but the form that I'm narrating it in, I say from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, who says that the Prophet sallallahu said. So the beginning of the chain, which is me and this connection to Abu Hurairah, is completely missing. That's what a mu'allaq hadith is. That the Prophet ﷺ is there, the companions there, towards this part, the hadith it's not connected all the way. Now, the form that we commonly narrate hadith is mu'allaq. However, that hadith is not necessarily mu'allaq. So I can say, you can refer back to Bukhari, and the chain is there. So the hadith itself is not. If there is no chain for it, if I don't know the people that are there, then it's mu'allaq in reality. So this is the first issue. The first issue with the chain, we're analyzing the chain, is the beginning of the chain, the people that are narrating it, not the Prophet, not the end of the chain. The beginning of the chain is missing. There's something that's missing in the beginning. It's very simple. So you have the Prophet ﷺ, companion, keeps going down, somebody in the beginning is missing. At the very beginning. Not in the middle, not at the end, at the very beginning. That is a mu'allaq hadith. That's your first one. All right. Number two. Number two is al-mursal. Hadith al-mursal. And this is actually one of the, probably one of the more famous ones. And the reason behind it is there's an actual discussion whether this hadith can be used as a legal reasoning or not. But in general, as we'll do right now, it's classified as weak. It's classified as da'if. That's the majority view of it, at least. So hadith mursal is a hadith that is missing the companion from the narration. That's all. So simple as that. It's not complicated, right? Hadith mursal means something to send something, right? That's the easiest way to remember, actually. Mursal in Arabic means to send. It's as if the tabi'i, the successor, is sending, right? He's skipping over the companion. This hadith is missing something from the very top of it. So it says the tabi'in's name, and it says the Prophet ﷺ narrated. And we know for a fact that this successor, this tabi'i, did not hear from the Prophet ﷺ directly, but he didn't mention the companion that he got the hadith from. And he's saying the Prophet ﷺ said, this hadith is a mursal narration. It's a mursal hadith. Now let me share an example of that, which is from your books. But just so people that don't have the book can see. Bismillah. All right, just somebody drop me a message once the screen is shared. Are we good? Can everybody see it? Okay, perfect. So you have this chain here, right? You have Uqayl, you have Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, a name you should be familiar with. You have Sa'id ibn Musayyib, and he's a very famous tabi'i. And then you have Sa'id saying that the Prophet ﷺ said. That's how the chain is going. This is the chain. The chain is missing a companion. If a chain is missing a companion, this chain is a mursal. And because it's mursal, what's the default ruling? Right? You guys should know this. And if you're sitting with family or even by yourself, say it out loud every time, right? It's missing something in the chain. It's missing a companion. Because it's missing something, it is a da'if hadith. Anytime something is missing from the chain, the hadith is da'if. It's weak, according to the majority. All right. So let's stop this share and let's talk about another possible type of mursal. So we're still in the second category, mursal hadith. Mursal simply means the companion is missing from the narration. Now there's a hadith known as mursal as-sahabi, right? The mursal of a companion. And that means that there is, remember, mursal by default, companion missing. So mursal as-sahabi means that there's a companion missing, but a companion is narrating it. So it's like this. It's the same chain that we had. Let's say Ibn Abbas narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said. However, we can confirm that Ibn Abbas didn't hear this directly from the Prophet ﷺ. That means he heard it from another companion, right? He heard it from another companion. And this can happen for multiple reasons. So sometimes you'll find a companion narrating a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. They'll say, the Prophet ﷺ said such and such. But we can confirm because of their biography that this companion was too young at the time of the Prophet ﷺ's death to be able to narrate this many hadith or this hadith or whatever, or this occasion. They're narrating something about the Battle of Badr, where we know this companion was born after the Battle of Badr. This is ala sabil al-mithal. This is in terms of just an example that we know by their biography that this companion is born after the Battle of Badr, yet they are narrating things about the Battle of Badr. So there is a companion missing, right? So whenever there's a companion missing, our brain should say hadith mursal. We know that's a hadith mursal. What type of mursal? Mursal as-sahabi. Why? Because there is a sahaba narrating it. However, there's another sahaba that they're getting it from that's missing in the chain. That's why it's mursal as-sahaba. Now, specifically for mursal and mursal only, there's a difference of opinion whether it can be used as a legal proof or not, right? We'll do the general ruling on da'if hadith, whether you can use it or not later. But specifically for the mursal category and exclusively only for mursal, don't think about any other category, there's a difference of opinion whether you can use it or not. The majority of scholars say that it's hadith da'if, it's a weak hadith and you cannot use it. That's the majority opinion. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, right, you can use a mursal hadith as long as the tabi'i that's narrating it is somebody trustworthy and narrates it from other trustworthy sources. So they allow it in certain circumstances. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they allow using mursal hadith because remember, mursal is either one of two things. Either it's a tabi'i that's skipping over this companion and saying that the Prophet ﷺ said, or it is another sahaba that's saying the Prophet ﷺ said. And because of that, they say that if it's somebody trustworthy, so it's a tabi'in that's well known, that's trustworthy, that's known throughout to be trustworthy and reliable, then you can use it. And same thing with if it's a sahaba narrating it or whatnot. All right, and Imam al-Shafi'i, he's kind of in between. He says you can use it very stringently, but the majority opinion is that they regard it as da'if. It's used more so in the Hanafi madhab than any other madhab in terms of the fiqh aspect of it, as far as I'm aware. However, the majority view the hadith itself as da'if, but depending on who's narrating it, as we said, not all da'if are equal. Depending on who's narrating it, they'll allow it for certain reasons. All right, so that covers mursal for us. We have two down. We have mu'allaq, which is at the very beginning of the chain, and we have mursal, which is the end of the chain, right? Mursal, you're missing the sahaba or the sahabi that's narrating it, and mu'allaq, which is the first one we did, we're missing the beginning of the chain, which is I'm jumping straight to some people in the chain. So the bottom is missing, or the beginning, sorry, I keep interchanging the two. All right. The next one that we're going to do is al-mu'dal. Al-mu'dal. And this hadith, this is number 3 for us. Again, deals with the chain, the sanad. The issue is going to be with the sanad somewhere. Mu'dal comes from the word a'dal, which means something that's mysterious, something that's puzzling, problematic. There's something, that doesn't seem right. And the technical definition of mu'dal that we need to know is that there's 2 or more missing from the chain in terms of back to back in terms of their succession. So it's back to back, 2 people or more missing. So it's not from different areas of the chain, they're back to back. 2 people are missing back to back or more. So it could be 3 people straight missing, 4 people, but it has to be 2 people or more. It can't just be 1. So it has to be 2 people together missing simultaneously back to back. They're missing from the chain, and it can be anywhere in the chain. So it can be anywhere. It can be in the beginning. If you have the tabi'i and the companion missing, hadith is mu'dal, right? It could be at the end of the chain. Wherever you find 2 people consecutively missing together, right, back to back missing, that hadith is mu'dal, 2 or more. That hadith is mu'dal. And this is because just the narration itself is mysterious. Why do you have a huge gap Right? You have two generations of people missing from this chain. All right, let me show you guys an example of this. Bismillah, let me know when the screen is shared. Can you guys see it? Okay, good. So this hadith you have Imam Malik who's narrating from Abu Huraira essentially. So it's Imam Malik and it jumps to Abu Huraira. But there's two narrators missing between Imam Malik and Abu Huraira. So because there's two people missing, it falls under the category that we're doing. Whenever we see the issue here, we have a chain here, we're analyzing the issue. The issue's with not the narrators. Imam Malik's trustworthy, Abu Huraira is trustworthy. These narrators are good to go. So the issue is not with the narrator himself. The issue is with the chain. We know there's people missing in the chain. We can verify that there's two people missing together, simultaneously, back to back. Two people missing back to back is what? Is mu'dal. It's not mursal because we have the companion. That's not the issue. It's not something at the bottom of the chain because you have al-Qa'nabi, right? Narrating from Imam Malik. The issue is two people missing together. That is a mu'dal hadith. So this hadith, this chain that we're looking at is an example of that. Okay. So that's three categories for us. So far, so good, right? I hope it's pretty simple so far. Bismillah. Let's move to the next one. The next category that we're doing is munqati'. Munqati'. It comes from the Arabic word inqata'a. And inqata'a means to cut, right? To interrupt, to cut. That's the linguistic definition of it. Hadith al-munqati', it literally means that there's a break anywhere in the chain. There's a break anywhere in the chain. Here's a question. So let me explain this one more time and then I'll ask you this question. Hadith al-munqati', the technical definition is that there's something broken in the chain. It can be anywhere in the chain, there's something missing, right? So the question for you is, which one of the previous three hadith types that we just did falls under munqati'? Munqati' is something missing anywhere in the chain, regardless of how many people are missing. Go ahead, send in your answers. All right, so the correct answer is all of them. So all of the categories that we just did can also be classified as munqati'. Why? Let's go over them again. Mu'allaq. Mu'allaq is something missing from the beginning of the chain, right? Not the Prophet ﷺ's end, the beginning of it. There's something missing. We said if there's a chain with anything missing, it's munqati'. So that one's munqati' for sure. Mursal. What's mursal? Hadith mursal is, you should be saying it out loud when we're doing this, just to practice. Hadith mursal is when the companion is missing, whether it be the tabi narrating it and jumping straight to Prophet ﷺ, or even another companion narrating it, jumping straight to Prophet ﷺ without mentioning the other companion. So companion is missing. Something's missing from the chain, it's munqati'. It's a broken chain. Munqati' means broken. Something's missing. It's interrupted. The next one that we did after that was mu'dal, which is the last one we did before this. And we said that mu'dal means two people are missing back to back. Somebody's missing from the chain, one or more, munqati'. So every single category we did so far is also a munqati' hadith, which is fine, right? It doesn't have to be categorized as one. Munqati' just means anything's missing. And that's why, for example, somebody might say, oh, that hadith is weak. It's munqati', meaning it's missing something from the chain. If a single person is missing from the chain, hadith is classified as da'if, and automatically it's classified as munqati'. And if you want to be more specific, if you want to say the companion is missing, you'll say it's munqati' and it's mursal. Or you can just say it's mursal, because mursal is munqati' by default. So you can be more specific and say it's mursal. Or you can say, well, not only is it mursal, because mursal has more value than mu'dal. Mu'dal is the one that's two people missing, right? So obviously if you have a companion missing and the tabi'i is narrating it, or another companion is narrating it, it's weak because there's somebody missing, but it's not as weak as two people missing back to back from the chain and there's a huge jump or a huge gap in the chain. So that's also munqati' because there's somebody missing, but a stronger type of munqati'. So munqati', anything is missing. That's four of them for us. All right. All right. The last type that we will do in terms of um, something, some issue with the chain itself is al-mudallas. Al-mudallas. And this one is a little bit interesting, slightly different from the others. The word dallasa means to conceal, to hide something, to conceal something. And this is used in terms of buying and selling. Let's say I'm trying to sell you a car, or I'm trying to sell you some sort of product. And before you come, let's say I'm trying to sell you a car and my car is scratched up. And before you come buy it, I buff it out to hide or to conceal the scratches or whatnot. And I don't tell you about it. I disclose it. Obviously, in transactions in buying and selling Islamically, that's haram. It's not allowed. You have to disclose truthfully. So that is tadlis. That's tadlis. That's a form of concealment. I'm trying to hide something. I'm covering it up. This is also used in hadith. And there are different reasons why a narrator would do this. And you'll find in the books of hadith, one of the common accusations that people do for narrators is they'll be like, this person's a mudallis. This person conceals, or like he's a bit sketchy. And the way that they're sketchy, or what they do is they'll say that I heard from, okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm trying to narrate a hadith. I'm trying to narrate hadith to you guys here. And instead of saying that I learned from my teacher, who learned, from his teacher, who learned from the main muhaddith of Egypt or something like that, I just say I narrated from the main muhaddith of Egypt. So I skip over my teacher and his teacher, right? And I jump straight to him. I never met this person. We're both alive at the same time. I never directly heard from this person, but at the same time, I don't lie. So I don't say I heard it directly from him as I was sitting in his class, but I'll use other words that are a bit sly. And this is done in hadith narration. So they'll find it. Scholars of hadith will find these type of words and they'll say, wait, and they'll check the biographies. And if it doesn't match up that they actually met, they'll classify it as tadlis. Like, why are you not being upfront? Why are you not? And again, sometimes people do it with a bad intent, and sometimes it's not with a bad intent. Sometimes they just want a shorter chain. So instead of saying, I heard from my teacher who heard from this person, they'll skip over the teacher. We're living at the same time, and they'll jump straight to the person, but they won't lie in their wording. So they won't say, I directly heard it from this person. And that's why this is it's concealing, right? But because there was somebody trying to be, a little sly, there was somebody trying to conceal something or make it seem as if they heard from a higher source, the scholars of hadith classify it as weak, and they classify this as mudallas. This hadith is because the narrator has done tadlis, and this can be either the hadith itself, and sometimes if a narrator is famously known to be a mudallis, commonly doing these type of things, all his narrations will be classified as that, even if the narration is perfectly fine. So you have to look out for it and what's the reasoning. And again, it goes back to the person grading it. So somebody grading the hadith might say, well, this person is a known mudallis. He constantly conceals and is sketchy. He constantly uses words to make it seem as if he has a shorter chain, skipping out the people that he's hearing it from directly, right? Versus somebody who might not do that. So remember when we did mursal, a tabi'i narrating it straight from the companion, right? Many times you have people that are not doing it for that reason, because that was the norm. So when you narrate hadith or I narrate hadith, we don't quote the entire chain, because that's the norm of our time. We can say Imam al-Bukhari, or there's a hadith in Bukhari that the Prophet ﷺ said this, or we can just say the hadith says this. Am I doing tadlis? No. Tadlis is when you're trying to conceal it. You're using specific words to make it seem that you're hearing it yourself. In no way that I'm claiming that I'm hearing it myself or whatnot. And when I say Abu Hurairah narrates, I'm not saying, none of you understand from that I heard Abu Hurairah say. So tadlis is a very specific category. And this is when they're trying to conceal something. And the technical definition that we can write down is a narration that has a hidden defect in the chain. Something is concealed to make it sound fine, to make it sound good. So there's some issue with it. And again, this can be done in different ways. It can be skipped over narrators right? You're leaving somebody out but you're alive at the same time. It can be you're not fully narrating it or whatnot. There's some sort of concealment, whatever the issue may be, in the chain, and that is known as mudallas. These are your 5 that we did. So let's quickly go over the 5. Number 1, mu'allaq, right? It's missing something from the very beginning of the chain, not the Prophet ﷺ's end, the beginning of the chain, mu'allaq. It's missing 1 or 2 people from the beginning. Mursal, it's missing a companion. It's missing a companion. And remember, all 5 of these are within an issue with the chain. There's an issue with the sanad. So mursal, it's missing a companion. And this is 2 types. There's the regular mursal, the default one, which is tabi'i, saying that they heard the Prophet ﷺ say, right? Or narrating. They wouldn't say sami'atu, right? If a tabi'i or anybody said sami'atu Rasulullah ﷺ, which means I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, that is da'if. That's not even, mursal. It's usually they'll say that the Prophet ﷺ said, or it's narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, right? They'll use other words. Sami'atu is the highest form, right? If a person does not hear directly, and even the mudallis, usually the one who's trying to conceal stuff, they won't use words like that because that straight up will throw the hadith out as weak hadith. That it's not even going to be under tadlis or concealment or some issue like that. It's a lie straight out. So mursal, you have the tabi'i narrating from the Prophet ﷺ, or a companion narrating from the Prophet ﷺ, but they didn't hear it directly. That's category number 2. Category number 3, mu'dal, which means that there is 2 people missing simultaneously, together, consecutively, from the chain, anywhere in the chain, but 2 people together. It could be top, middle, bottom, anywhere in the chain, 2 people back to back are missing. The next one is munqati', which means there's an interruption anywhere in the chain. 1 person missing or more anywhere in the chain, meaning all 3 before this were also munqati'. The last one is mudallas, which is there's some sort of concealment. There's a hidden defect, you can kind of say, in the chain. So these are the 5 that deal with the chain, weakness in the chain. That's the 5 that deal with the weakness in the chain. All right, so let me see. I'm trying to see if it's worth moving on to the next categories. All right, let me ask you guys, do you guys want to take more categories, or do you want to do that in a separate class? It's whatever you prefer. So we've done 5 different categories. We can do about 5 more. Or do you prefer to spread it out? Okay, separate class. All right, so let's do this. So looking at the syllabus, let me actually screen share it so you guys can see it with me. Let's readjust this. All right, so looking at the syllabus, we are class number 15, which is July 22nd, topic number 17. So topic number 17 and 18 we were supposed to do together, but it seems like a lot. So what we will do is we'll push everything 1. So the role of fiqh, we'll do it on the 29th. And next class we'll cover the rest of these categories, and then we'll talk about the weakness or acting upon a weak hadith as well. And then where we're supposed to do the review, we will do the role of hadith in fiqh. So we'll push that to 1 class as well. And then for the quiz, we can push that as well. So we'll adjust this. I mean, this is extra anyway, so we'll be fine, inshallah. So that pretty much ends today's class then, inshallah. And then next class, we're going to take not all the categories, because I don't think all of them are important. We will do about 5 or 6 of the most famous ones that are more common. The other few will go over what they are, but you don't need to memorize them. So let me end the YouTube link and then we'll open it up for Q&A, inshallah.